The debate around election integrity continues, with primaries in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and 3 other states today. A climate change lawsuit is among the first to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court this fall, interpreting last week's jobs report and investigating non-government organizations that get tax dollars. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Tuesday, August 11th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. 5 states go to the polls today, and once again, Americans will vote under completely different sets of rules. In Wisconsin, they have strict voter ID required, no exceptions at the door. In Minnesota, that also has primaries today, most registered voters show nothing. Connecticut, they'll be asking for ID, but a photo is not required. A social security card or utility bill with your name on it can do the job. Vermont, also heading to the polls, and all you have to do there is just state your name. That's usually enough. Alabama, certain U.S. House districts are up in primaries, and they require voter ID, with a free state-issued photo ID available if you don't have one. Same country, same election day, wildly different standards for proving who you are. And that kind of patchwork makes some people wonder, would a single, clear national standard actually increase confidence in those results? Or is the current system working exactly as designed? Congress is in recess until September, but the fight over federal election rules isn't taking a break. Hardliners are publicly hammering Senate Republican leadership for refusing to bring up the Save America Act. That bill, as the Center Square's Therese Boudreau reports, would require voters to show valid ID in federal elections, demand proof of citizenship when registering to vote, require in-person registration for federal races, and it would force every state to scrub non-citizens from their voter rolls. Now, under the legislation, a driver's license alone wouldn't cut it for registration because non-citizens, they can legally obtain one in a lot of states. You'd need to have a birth certificate, passport, or other documents that can actually prove citizenship. Now, Senate Majority Leader John Thune's already said the votes aren't there. Republicans hold 53 seats. The bill needs 60. So math is math. But still, a vocal minority of Republicans demanding not only a vote, but a rewrite of the filibuster rules to force the measure through. President Donald Trump's repeatedly told leaders to make the Save America Act a priority, even if it means killing the filibuster. Opposition remains fierce. I spoke with Stephen Kaufman, he's founder of the Kaufman Legal Group, about the broader push for voter ID, including what's happening right now in the state of California. Election integrity is definitely a hot issue heading into the November 2026 midterm general election, and joining us to talk about some of the issues around election integrity is Stephen Kaufman. He is founder of the Kaufman Legal Group. Stephen, thanks for taking time with us here on The States. Let's jump right on into it. What are some of the crucial issues around this conversation of election integrity?
Well, it would be an understatement to say that the president has made an issue of election integrity heading into the 2026 election, and we're seeing efforts at both the federal level and at the state level to try and allegedly ensure more integrity in elections. My personal opinion is that these efforts are more of a voter suppression effort than a voting integrity effort, but they've certainly masked themselves under the guise of voter integrity.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? What are some of the issues you're saying could lead to voter suppression that is being pushed for by the White House?
Well, the SAVE Act, which has been passed by the House but is now sitting in the Senate, requires citizens it requires people who are trying to vote to provide documentary proof of their citizenship, and it's not just a driver's license requirement. You have to, when registering to vote, provide a passport, a birth certificate, or some other document that actually provides evidence of citizenship. And frankly, that's not something that everyone necessarily has at their fingertips. As you know, there have been many efforts nationwide, both at the federal, state, and local levels, to try and increase and enhance voter registration, make it easier for people to register. And these requirements are simply an obstacle and impediment to people being able to register to vote.
Is it just the idea of having to get those documents? Because the real ID, doesn't that require you to have these types of documents to be able to get that particular form of identification?
The SAVE Act doesn't actually provide for the real ID. It provides for documents that are acceptable when applying for a real ID, but many people do not have passports. It may be hard for some of us to believe, but there are many people that don't have passports. Many people don't have access to their birth certificates, and it's not a particularly easy thing for people to be able to gather or provide this information when trying to register to vote, particularly given that many people are able to register online now and do it in ways that government has tried to make it easier for people to register to vote. And now we have these newfound obstacles that actually are prohibitive.
What do you say to those who point to New Jersey, which recently just found around 6,600 non-citizens ended up being registered to vote because of some of these, procedures you're laying out, like auto voter registration? If anybody interacts with a government agency, they could automatically get registered to vote if they remember to click a certain button that says that they are or are not a citizen.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing to remember is this was discovered and it was dealt with. I think it's a misnomer to say that there's fraud in our elections. I've been practicing in this area for 30 years now. And while there might be an occasional isolated incident where an individual is trying to forge signatures and there's a dozen or a couple dozen signatures on ballots that could potentially be fraudulent, I have never seen the type of widespread fraud that's being alleged to have occurred on a national level. And frankly, my experience with election officials, both in California and around the country, is that they are very much committed to election integrity, having fair and accurate elections. And these people are doing a very, very difficult job, some of them on shoestring budgets, to try and make sure that our elections are run fairly. And, I think that these allegations of voter fraud are convenient ways to dismiss decisions that are made by voters that people aren't happy with and provide a convenient way of justifying the results.
And we'll see what happens with the Save America Act, and if Congress does get that across the finish line, of course, in the Senate. It's interesting to see how that plays out. But that would only impact federal elections. You're in California, and there seems to be a measure that's going to be in front of voters coming up in November that deals with voter ID. Tell us your understanding of the status of that question.
Yeah, that is correct. There is a ballot measure that's qualified for the ballot in November, Proposition 39. It is being promoted again as sort of an election integrity measure. Unlike the SAVE Act, which deals with voter registration, this particular measure actually deals with voting and requires people who are voting in person to provide their identification each time they show up to vote in person. It's not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, not just with registration, but when they actually go to the voting booth to grab their ballot.
That's correct. Unlike the SAVE Act, it does permit for driver's license, for example, but it does require people to have identification when they show up at the polls, which is not required in California right now, and also requires people who vote by mail, which has become the more prevalent way to cast ballots over the last few cycles, to actually include on their on their ballot envelopes the last four digits of either their social security number, their driver's license number, exposing those numbers on the outside of an envelope in the mails to election officials, which is a extreme, perilous invasion of privacy. And would really kind of upset the way we conduct elections in California. and there's literally litigation happening as we speak over ballot language that's going to be presented to the voters this fall on that measure.
It'd be interesting to see the outcome of that, and then also if this question ultimately does get on the ballots and how it's asked and what the outcome is in November. But Stephen, if you could just elaborate a bit on why there is so much pushback about ensuring that somebody is a citizen in order to register to vote, or as the president has said, limiting mail-in voting, which studies in the past have shown it could increase the possibility of fraudulent votes. Why is there so much pushback against these things?
Again, I think this is really just an effort to dissuade people from voting and intimidate people into not voting, people who think they may be subject to scrutiny if they have to show up with ID. The government has threatened to and has sent Department of Justice personnel into different jurisdictions to sort of oversee the elections that are taking place. And I think it's an intimidation and suppression tactic that is being used as a weapon. Vote by mail ballots, which as a result of COVID, frankly, were made easier to cast by people around the country. It used to be when I started practicing in a lot of states, you had to show a reason to request a vote by mail ballot, but states have eased the opportunity, and actually we've seen increases in voter participation as a result of that. It used to be that the Republicans were the masters of vote by mail balloting, and we would typically see that those ballots skewed Republican. But in the last few election cycles where it's become a more prevalent way of voting, those trends have sort of shifted. And it's only as those trends have shifted that we've seen this backlash against vote by mail balloting, which frankly, we should be spending our time trying to encourage people to vote and make it easier for people to vote. And vote by mail balloting is the perfect example of that, how that system works.
But shouldn't that also be something that's, you're putting safeguards in place to make sure that there isn't potential for fraud? Because I would imagine if there are questions, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a Libertarian, Green, Socialist, whatever the question may be, if you've got concerns about the integrity of the election, I mean, that's going to dilute confidence in the election process.
Yeah, sure. There should be absolute integrity in the process. And, I think that we have those guardrails in place. People have to certify under penalty of perjury that they are citizens. They have to file papers with the government, and they have to certify every time they vote. So I think that the appropriate guardrails are in place. Government agencies do, review paperwork, and if they identify people who are not citizens, then they will remove them from the rolls. But, we haven't had any record of widespread voter fraud where, other than, an occasional individual who may not be registered or may not be properly registered, is identified, there haven't been any reported cases of widespread activity where non-citizens collectively are somehow registering to vote and being able to cast their ballots.
Yeah, and the widespread versus, there have been instances of fraud in some, isolated jurisdictions, not widespread per se. But talk about the importance of having that decentralized system of voting, right? It's not just, the separation of federal elections from state elections, but even within states, like I'm in Illinois, each county, each of the 102 counties have their own election process on election day, really decentralizing things. Why is that so important?
Well, it's important for a state like yours and a state like mine where you have such sort of a diverse population, right? We have coastal cities here with large populations, and then we have rural populations in other parts of the state. And folks that run elections in some of the more rural areas find that it's a very different way of voting than some of the more urban areas where vote by mail may be more popular. In some rural areas, it's a long trip for people to get to polling places. They may want to vote by mail, and in other places, they may prefer sort of the more quaint voting in person, going down to the school and casting your ballot. So, I mean, a lot of it really depends on the local jurisdiction, but the states have certain standards that have to be maintained throughout those jurisdictions. And even, there are certain federal, if not requirements, in order to get federal funding, there are certain mandates that people have to follow in order to be able to implement their voting machinery, their voting equipment, and their method of voting.
Well, you've been watching this stuff play out and been involved in the legal aspects of this for the past 30 years, so greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here today. Stephen Kaufman, founder of Kaufman Legal Group, greatly appreciate you joining us here for the States. Wisconsin voters find out today who their major party nominees are for November. On the Democratic side, the most recent statewide poll of Democratic voters released Friday by State Navigate, it showed State Representative Francesca Hong leading with 44%. Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley sat at 22%, and State Senator Kelda Roys trailed at 11%. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop, and you, of course, have that Wisconsin primary. 4 other states also have their primary. But in the race for governor, Hong in Wisconsin sat down with Wisconsin Eye a few weeks ago, and they focused on affordability.
We need to expand Medicaid. We have to look at pilot options, including a public option and increasing basic health plans. And we know that healthcare costs are high because healthcare prices are high. So looking at where we can see tax exemptions or fluctuating prices or unfair pricing from hospitals, making sure that those are at market prices, similar to legislation that passed in Indiana, to make sure that we're helping to maintain healthcare costs at a lower level by ensuring we're bringing down healthcare prices.
Also speaking to Wisconsin Eye, Crowley said that he's the Democrat that will actually focus on the issues hitting people's pocketbooks.
It's the affordability crisis, whether we're talking housing, childcare, healthcare, groceries, gas at the pump. Everybody understands that they need a little bit of relief. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure, one, that we are assisting our public schools, one that will help to naturally ease the property tax pressures that many communities are facing right now. I truly believe that, one, we need to repeal the Unfair Sales Act. This will help save more money at the pump for all of our residents across the state of Wisconsin to the tune of about 30 to 40 cents per gallon. But we also need to make sure that we're focusing on childcare, healthcare as well.
Joel Brennan, he's a former top cabinet official under Governor Tony Evers. He argued that the answer lies within the people.
One of the first things we need to do is make sure we at least inject in enough into that system to keep it going for the time being. The statistics say that about 25% of daycares are in danger of closing in the next 6 months to a year. Waiting lists are going to increase. Prices are going up. I was at a daycare on Monday, and the woman said she's increasing her prices by 10% come September 1. And it is directly as a result of the fact that the state's not taking care of its end of the bargain when it comes to daycare.
Now, there's obviously a lot of choices in the Democratic field, and one more is candidate Roys. She's putting childcare costs front and center. She says she has a way to pay for it all,
which is to expand the Wisconsin Shares program, which is paid for 60% by federal funds, to let everyone participate in that. And that way we can cap the cost for parents at 7% of your income per kid. And for most parents, say you make $100,000 a year, that would be $7,000 per child. I can tell you that is far less than what I pay as a parent of a kid in child care. And we can pay for the state portion of that by legalizing and taxing cannabis. I like to call it get baked for babies.
Now, on the Republican side, someone else talking about cannabis legalization is Andy Mansky. He told Wisconsin Eye how he'd make life more affordable, and that's just one of the options.
Obviously, at some point, I would love to pursue getting rid of maybe the income tax or moving towards reducing that gas markup tax, if you will, for our gas, obviously with the whole Iran stuff going on. But I would like to see life be cheaper as a whole. I think, no offense to the surplus thing, but if you have a surplus and it's not being put into the citizens, I mean, it's just sitting there. It's just like a bank account that has the money sitting there. It's not really doing anything. You actually might be losing value over time. I think it should be put forward. When it comes to a surplus as a whole, I'd love to see more money come in. I've talked about legalizing marijuana with regulations, guidelines, protecting populists, protecting special needs kids, because I work in the medical field.
Now, while Hong faces several Democrats in the Democrat primary, Mansky, who you just saw there, faces Republican U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany in the Republican gubernatorial primary. Tiffany, on his campaign site, pledges to freeze property taxes, repeal recent tax hikes, drive down energy costs by focusing on reliable baseload power, and to cut what he calls burdensome regulations on housing, childcare, and healthcare. Now, other big races in Wisconsin today include the crowded 7th Congressional District primary that's set to replace Tiffany, who's the presumptive Republican nominee for governor based on polling. And again, there are 6 candidates on the ballot in other races there for the Democrats. And a quick reminder, Wisconsin Elections Commission state law still bans anyone who's waged on the outcome of an election from casting a ballot. So those predictive markets, if you take part in that in Wisconsin, you can't vote legally in the Wisconsin election. Now, Wisconsin's strict voter ID requirement is also in full force. The Department of Transportation's Division of Motor Vehicles extending its hours today, and that's until 6 o'clock local time, so that people can still get their ID if they need to vote. Now, Minnesota, they take a different approach. No voter ID required. In the latest you can find at the Center Square, the U.S. Department of Justice stationed federal agents to monitor polling sites in 2 Minnesota counties ahead of today's primary election. The Justice Department announced that agents from the Civil Rights Division monitoring polling locations in Hennepin and Ramsey counties. The 2 counties account for the majority of Minnesota's urban centers, including Minneapolis and St. Paul. Harmeet Dillon, Assistant Attorney General in the department's Civil Rights Division, said that the deployment of federal agents was part of a broader effort to ensure election integrity across the country. Leaders in Minnesota slammed the Justice Department's plan to deploy agents in the 2 counties. Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon said he plans to have state observers stationed to monitor the extent of federal oversight. But the races in Minnesota still very much top of mind for voters, including which party could possibly control Congress. Election watchers zeroing in on Minnesota's 1st, 2nd, and 5th congressional districts. In the 5th, U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar is seeking a 5th term after months of renewed national attention. She's called for abolishing immigration customs enforcement, lowering prescription drug costs, and limiting Trump's military prowess regarding Iran. She's facing challenges from several people, including a probation officer and an attorney. And you have whoever that Democratic nominee is, they will face Dalia Al-Aldiki, a Republican candidate who's made targeting fraud in state government the centerpiece of her campaign. Minnesotans are also choosing their nominees for governor today. Governor Tim Walz, he announced that he would not seek a 3rd term after reports of fraud in federal programs and the Trump administration's decision to pursue prosecutions. Several candidates on both sides now vying for the job. And in Minnesota, the governor and lieutenant governor, they run on the same ticket. And there's also an interesting race. U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar jumping in after Walz said he wasn't going to run. She's focused on fighting fraud in the state and distancing herself from Walz. She faces 6 other candidates. On the Republican side, 3 names leading the pack. Former MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, Minnesota House Speaker Melissa DeMuth, and Kendall Qualls. Last night, Lindell got the support of President Donald Trump. Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, Mike Lindell deserves a big win in Minnesota today. Nobody's worked harder and given up so much in fighting for free and fair elections. Go out now and vote for Mike Lindell for governor. He will not let you down. Thank you, President DJT. We'll be watching those races closely. There's also primaries today in Connecticut, Vermont, and several U.S. House seats in Alabama. Get the latest at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more. The U.S. Supreme Court, they're set to hear arguments in a case that could determine the future of legal actions over energy companies' alleged contributions to climate change. Question, can one state dictate climate policy elsewhere? Welcome back to the states. Now, justices on the high courts, they said that they will hear Suncor versus Boulder County Commissioners October 5th. That's the first day of oral arguments in the upcoming term. What's the significance of this case? Well, let's talk with the Center Square reporter, Andrew Rice. Andrew, thanks for taking time with us. What's at the center of this case?
Right, Greg. Well, really, the center of this case is, as you said, how or whether states are able to regulate commerce and specifically, in this case, energy companies across the country. Really, when we look at this case, we see how county commissioners in Boulder County, Colorado, sought to use state laws to regulate energy companies from conducting behavior that may contribute to climate change, such as emitting greenhouse gases. So really, the heart of this issue is whether or not states can regulate commerce and other activities, not just within their states, but across the board in other states, and even, Greg, even across the world.
Now, Andrew, obviously the Supreme Court hears all kinds of different cases. Sometimes they may have stuff that's precedent setting from years ago that some of the justices who made that decision could still be on the panel. What do we know of this issue that has been previously discussed? Is it clear what kind of guidance the Supreme Court's previously given on this, or are we kind of in new uncharted waters, so to speak?
Right. Well, Greg, the precedent is really murky here, to be quite honest, in the Supreme Court. Just a decision back in 2022, pork producers versus Ross, was a pretty significant decision that will contribute, and I think will be seen in large part in the oral arguments in this case. That case was challenging a California law where the state restricted certain farms that had what was perceived to be inhumane conditions for pigs, certain farms that would take pork products, but that had inhumane conditions for pigs. It prohibited them from selling their products in California. This was meant to target farms in the state, but it was seen throughout the case that a lot of pork producers across the country in other states that shipped their product into California were disproportionately affected by this rule. So that's going to come into play in a really significant way here in how energy companies in other states that aren't Colorado are regulated in the wake of this decision.
It makes you think about the Commerce Clause and interstate commerce and how exactly, going from mandating how pigs are treated in one state being sold in another state. But here we're talking about the climate. Clouds don't really look at borders, right? They don't know the difference between North Carolina and South Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see. But what are some of the concerns that you've been hearing about this case, depending on whichever way it may land?
Right. Well, one of the big concerns that I've seen and heard from sources that I've spoken to is really that this is not the only case that there is of this caliber. Certainly, this Colorado case has come up to the Supreme Court, but there's a patchwork of states across the country who have attempted to use these same kind of laws to restrict energy companies from engaging in some of these activities that may contribute to climate change. All of these issues are not just being litigated in the states; they're litigated across the country, and they fall on either side. So what I'm hearing from a lot of consumer advocates is this is going to really tie up certain businesses and certain energy companies in their ability to move forward in general production. And then on the other side of that, hearing a lot of concern that this needs to be a regulation that's put forward, and that climate change is an existential threat to the nation and the world.
You got a statement from the executive director of the Alliance for Consumers, O.H. Skinner, and they said that you're going to see people come back to the till again and again in an attempt to govern the national economy from state laws. The answer of, well, Congress could just pass a uniform law that tramples all the states equally, in a really sad outcome, because they said that we're supposed to have a federal system for a reason. It seems to kind of encapsulate some of the concerns that there may be on where this case may land. So we'll be watching that pretty close here. But what's interesting, too, is a little side note, Justice Samuel Alito apparently not retiring. He's going to be on the bench for the start of the October 5th week there. Your thoughts on what we had heard of the possibility he's retiring, and then we get this Trump Truth Social last night celebrating Alito staying on the bench.
Right. Well, that was a little surprising, I would say, to me to hear that from Trump. We've heard various conflicting reports that Alito would possibly be retiring from sources across the spectrum, and really, when you look at this, you have to see that these Supreme Court justice appointments are life terms. So Alito, who is typically a more conservative voice on the court and tends to side with the Trump administration in more cases than he doesn't, he's a really big advocate for President Trump, but he has been on the court for quite a while now. And so, looking forward, the thought is that Alito would want to retire to allow President Trump to find a replacement for him that could continue this conservative reign on the Supreme Court.
We'll be watching that closely. Looking forward to more conversations with you, Andrew, about all of the cases that are expected to be heard in this coming term. There's some big things going to be happening at the Supreme Courts, and greatly appreciate you being there to watch it all for us. We'll be right back with more here from the States. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Friday's jobs report is being read as the front edge of a downturn, but that may not be exactly what's happening. With more insight on what's happening with the economy is Everyday Economics hosts, the Center Square publisher Chris Krug, and PhD economist Orphe Divounguy.
Let's talk about rent inflation. It just hit a 5-year low, and I think what you're trying to say, Dr. O, is nobody's rent really went down.
Exactly.
It sounds like a little bit of a
CPI, right?
Right. It sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but it's not. It's the difference between how government measures the cost of a roof over your head and what it actually costs you to keep one. It's good to be with you again.
I'm so glad you're back from your vacation, Chris.
I hadn't taken one in quite a while. Greg Bishop, I want to say thanks to him. He is just so unbelievably talented as a journalist and so versatile.
Yes.
So thanks to Greg for holding down Everyday Economics the last couple of weeks. All right, first question. Shelter is the biggest piece of the consumer price index, right? Roughly, it's a third of the whole.
45% for inflation.
In June, it rose 0.1%, the smallest increase since January 2021. But when the government measures housing costs, it isn't exactly measuring what a house sells for, right? So what's really inside that number?
Yeah, look, I think the easiest way to put it is it's a combination of, it's really a combination of what people are paying. It's like an average.
Yeah.
What are people paying in rent today, right? But it's based on a survey. And, the way to get to, so it's not bad in terms of reflecting what people are paying in rent, right? The rent to primary residence measure. The owner's equivalent rent measure is basically telling you, is kind of asking you, what would people pay to rent your own home, right?
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of noise in that number. It's a survey. If you talk to people out there, what are they telling you? They're telling you that the rent is higher than it was before.
Mm-hmm.
Rent growth may have slowed, but rents are increasing still. I think that's the important thing for all listeners. So rents are on the rise. They're just growing at a slower pace.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there had been this kind of slowdown in rent growth going on for a couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for the slowdown in rent growth was a surge of supply in terms of apartment buildings.
Okay.
There's been so many buildings across the country, especially throughout some of the Sun Belt markets, so many apartment buildings being built during the pandemic that actually helped to cool down rent increases.
Okay.
Right? And that was the good news. The bad news is builders stopped building.
Yeah.
They pulled back. And as builders pulled back, the market rebalanced. And today, what we're seeing in the housing market, in rental markets, is that completions, the flow of units coming on the market, is roughly stable, is roughly equal to absorption,
mm-hmm.
right? So supply and demand are roughly in balance now
mm-hmm.
in the rental market.
Yep.
And what that means is that the vacancy rate, right, the share of units that were vacant, that was rising really rapidly to give renters more choice and to slow down rent growth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's no longer rising.
Mm-hmm.
The vacancy rate is somewhat stable. And if you look at Zillow numbers, rent numbers,
mm-hmm.
well, what you learn is that rent growth over the past year has actually started to accelerate.
Interesting.
So remember, it was cooling,
yes,
which was great. It showed up in the CPI rent numbers as, hey, we get some disinflation coming from rents.
Right.
That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
You're starting to see asking rents reaccelerate. And if asking rents start to reaccelerate, well, that means that whatever rent disinflation we were counting on in the government numbers, it's no longer happening.
Yeah. Hey,
and I think that's a big problem for policymakers.
Then we can talk. Well, let's talk about that after we talk about just what's going on the transaction side. Right. I mean, it just in the broader in the home market. Right. Existing home sales are running nearly 4 million a year and are forecast to slip again. Builder confidence, as you said, is low. It sits at 34 right now, and 50 is the line between builders calling conditions good and calling them poor. So it's leaning toward poor. Housing starts are around 1.43 million. Okay. Permits are at 1.37 million, and permits running below starts means that pipeline of new home construction is starting to thin out. So the cost of housing Right.
That is the main point.
Yeah, so let's talk about
this.
this. The cost of housing is cooling at the exact moment almost nobody's buying or building, right? So what's the market say to you?
I think that is the main point, and that's the point I was making earlier, is that because builders have pulled back, because you're going to have fewer units coming on the market in the near future, you're going to start to see some pressure on the price front.
Okay.
Again. Right? And that pressure is already starting to show up in rents, and it will eventually start to show up in prices, in for sale prices.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, there won't be any homes to buy. Right? For sale inventory is still 20% below where it was before the pandemic on the for sale side. Right? So, you got people moving about their lives. They want to get a unit. Maybe they're moving out of their parents' house and trying to rent a small apartment.
Yeah.
Well, there are no more apartments, no fresh new apartments coming on the market. The vacancy rate's no longer rising. People trying to get in the for sale market and buy their first home. Well, there aren't that many homes to choose from.
That's right.
Right? And so, and I talk about this all the time. If you look at across the country, the gap between the number of families that are in need of a house or an apartment and the number of units we have available for rental for sale each year is about 4.3 million units. That's a big gap, right? And that gap isn't going away if builders start to pull back, which is exactly what they've done in the past couple of years, right? They're slowing down the pace of new construction. It means inventory is no longer rising, is not expected to increase very much.
Yeah.
And both on the for sale side and the for rent side, which means that prices aren't coming down. And in fact, price growth could start to accelerate again.
Well, we're going to keep an eye on this. There's lots to monitor here. I mean, that gap is, I think, of concern to a lot of Americans, especially the Americans that are trying to become first-time home buyers, right? I mean, that the barrier to entry to buy that first home is pretty high right now for a lot of
people. And a lot of people say, well, it's the mortgage rates. No, I mean, mortgage rates are at kind of the average. Yes, they're higher, but they're roughly at a normal place.
Right. That's the issue. First time we bought a house, I think our mortgage rate was 7 5/8, so we were doing cartwheels because that was just a great number.
They're roughly at a normal place. The problem is the price level is much higher.
That's
much higher.
That is the problem. Well, thanks again for everything that you do for Everyday Economics and the Center Square. Make sure that you read Orphe's Everyday Economics column each week, Mondays at the Center Square. Everyday Economics, just so you know, is part of the States. That's the Center Square's daily news magazine. You can see that on YouTube and across streaming platforms.
A southern state that banned medical gender transitions for children is funding a network of doctors and therapists who promote some of those same controversial treatments. And an Illinois nonprofit has paid more than $2 million to businesses owned by its founder, promoting an obscure PTSD treatment that involves injections in the neck. These are just a couple of the findings in an ongoing investigation from the Center Square's Enterprise and Investigations Unit. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Yesterday, we talked with EIU managing editor Art Kane about the series of stories forthcoming. The latest delves into how North Carolina taxpayers are paying a trans nonprofit despite there being a ban on medical transition on children. Here's more from the EIU team.
It's very problematic when you see such a large increase, and there doesn't seem to be any accountability with the money going to the nonprofits.
Taxpayer money going to nonprofits has more than doubled in the past decade, with hundreds of billions of dollars going to programs and salaries.
Nonprofits should survive based upon the goodwill of people, not the forced taking of taxpayer dollars.
David Williams is president of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. He's reacting to data that the Center Square obtained showing that in 2016, taxpayers sent $149 billion to nonprofits in the U.S. In 2022, that figure went up to $319 billion.
And when you have taxpayer money that's going to a nonprofit to pursue or promulgate issues that the government is not allowed to pursue or promulgate, well, then it's just a pass-through.
The Center Square found the state of North Carolina funded a nonprofit that promotes gender-affirming care for minors as young as infants and toddlers. That's despite state law strictly prohibiting transgender medical treatments on children. The law also bars spending state funds on gender surgeries, puberty blockers, or cross-sex hormones for kids.
They're connecting these people with healthcare providers who will enable that. And on the website, it was alarming that they actually have a drop-down box for age categories. So you can look up your provider according to what age the patient is. And I was shocked to see that they have children included there because we have outlawed gender transitioning for minors in North Carolina. I can't think of any reason the government should be involved in this.
And the taxpayers also often pay for big salaries for the people running the nonprofits, with nearly 4,000 nonprofits where government money pays at least 50% or more of executive salaries.
What this shows is that taxpayers are funding salaries, not programs. When you have 25 or 50% of the money going towards salaries, it's not going towards the mission of the nonprofit.
Going further, some nonprofits spend their money in other questionable ways. That includes paying vast amounts of money to businesses that are owned or controlled by their founders or other executives. Erase PTSD Now, for example, has paid millions in recent years to businesses owned by its founder, Dr. Eugene Lipoff.
Dr. Lipoff gets a small percentage of the Stella Centers, but we look at all that, and then the rest of them, yeah, it's all HIPAA compliant and conflict of interest checked, and we run through with an attorney.
And if you're receiving taxpayer money, you should be required to do a full audit every year. And when I talk about a full audit, I'm talking about looking at receipts, exactly what the money was spent on. These nonprofits are not accountable, and government officials haven't held them accountable. And until government officials hold them accountable to this, we're not going to see that detail.
The Center Square plans to continue digging through the data to find questionable expenses and how much nonprofits are getting paid by your tax dollars. If you know a nonprofit that needs investigating, please email Enterprise and Investigation Unit Manager, Editor Art Kane. Again, the email is akane@thecentersquare.com, akane@thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here Wednesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.